To review, in the last module, we looked at 4 different explanations for rising inequality. Demographic, population changes alone do not offer a meaningful explanation for rising inequality. Increased immigration, declining unionization, and minimum wage changes do explain a small amount of increased inequality, but only at the bottom of the distribution and only for a subset of the long period of growing inequality. In this and the following modules, we'll consider 2 other broad explanations for or causes of growing inequality. Both of these seem likely to have contributed to rising inequality, though it is probably impossible to assign or quantify the specific contributions of each. In this section, we'll consider the role of technological change in driving rising inequality. Recall from an earlier module that a key feature of rising inequality is that there has been an increase in the earnings of college-educated workers relative to those without a college degree, and an increase in the top percentiles of the earnings distribution relative to those in the middle or bottom. If higher education imparts additional skills on workers that are rewarded in the labor market, these facts about the earnings of highly educated workers should lead us to explore explanations for rising inequality that relate to the role of and rewards for skill. Thus, changes in technology that place a greater importance on and more highly reward workers' skills have been explored as a likely cause for rising inequality. Beginning around 1980, the advent, growth, and development of advanced computer technology may have changed the ways in which many workers do their jobs. One clue to economists that this might be important comes from looking at the price of computers and related technologies over time. This chart shows, for example, the change in prices of all goods, which typically rise by 1 to 3% per year or more during some periods in our history. It also shows the dramatic decline in the price of computers and related items over recent decades. Why might this be a clue that earnings could be changing in ways that increase inequality? As a productive factor, like computers or microchips, becomes more available or cheaper, as it did over many of the past decades, it should be more commonly used in production. We also know from basic economics that certain combinations of productive factors can be complements and so tend to be used together in production. If relatively skilled workers and computers and related technology are complements, the declining price of new technology could lead to an increased demand for skilled workers and a corresponding decrease in demand for less skilled workers. This is one description of a particular form of technological change known as skill-biased technical change. This means that new technologies being used in production tend to be particularly useful when used by or in combination with relatively skilled workers. Many economists have argued that this seems to describe the type of technological changes the U.S. and the world have seen since the 1980s. A related aspect of new technology is that less skilled workers who previously engaged in routine tasks may have been partially replaced by the new technology. So the connection between rising inequality and technological change depends crucially on the new technology having this skill-biased feature, which would tend to raise the wages of the most skilled, slow down growth or lower wages of lower skilled groups, and so correlate with rising inequality. It is worth noting that technological change does not have to be skill-biased. In many previous historical or industrial settings, we can find examples of neutral technical change that makes all or a broad set of workers more productive. It's useful to use our basic microeconomic framework to illustrate how this increase in demand for highly skilled workers, represented as a shift to the right in the demand curve for skilled workers, may lead to higher wages. As shown here, such an increase in demand is likely to push up the wages of relatively skilled workers. The increase in demand for more skilled workers in recent decades may have been reinforced by a slowdown in the growth of the supply of highly educated workers in the U.S. In the 1970s, as more baby boomers completed college than any prior cohort of workers, the supply of skilled workers increased rapidly. This reflected high rates of college attendance as many sought to avoid the military draft and subsequent college enrollments under the GI Bill among those who did serve in the military. Since the 1980s, however, increases in college completion rates have been small. If we think of this slowdown in the growth of college-educated workers as a reduction in the supply of workers, at least relative to what would be expected if the trends in the 70s continued, that may reinforce rising wages for the highly educated. As this illustration shows, when demand for highly skilled workers increases, but supply of those workers decreases, both forces will tend to push wages upward. Some economists argue that rising demand initially pushed wages to the equilibrium level indicated by point 2, and a slowdown in growth of the supply of workers may have increased wages further in equilibrium to point 3. In sum, technological change that favors relatively skilled workers, combined with a slowdown in the relative growth of the supply of skilled workers, may be key factors that have contributed to rising inequality, particularly in inequality in the upper half of the earnings distribution. Research has shown that some of the earliest wage gains were concentrated among industries with relatively intensive use of computers. Over several decades, however, it has also become clear that the rise in inequality has occurred within almost every industry, so that changing technology and computerization may not be the full story either. In addition, recall that deterioration in the wages of low-skilled workers occurred mainly in the 1980s. Yet prices of technology continued to decline and new technologies continued to spread well after the 1980s. In the next module, we'll explore one other major contributing factor to rising inequality.